voices contend. To stop putting square pegs in round holes and recycling unfulfilled government utterances, let's see the big picture for all sectors in one integrated economy and speak to growth from the bottom up. Governance on Cue, promoting good governance for growth. Fresh ideas and new mindsets for tangible results-oriented progress and growth for all. Governance on Cue. Everyone welcome to join the conversation. Call us at 767-449-3095, 96 or 97, or 767-616-4257. From overseas, call 305-432-9624. Governance on Cue, Monday nights, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Only on the big station. Only on Q95.
Hey, 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 come to and come to and come to and come to and come. I have a story to tell you. Come to and come to and come to and come to and come. I have a story to tell you. Come. There is a child of the 70s and I'm crying now. When I look around at my youths today, I feel a how. You see, the struggle was never about one battle and stop. But from where we left off, our youths today are not picking up. The transgression and regression I see today and feel. Well, it has to be an illusion, no, it cannot be real. Foolishness have crowded their conscious mind. All progress we made, they have left behind. All positive gains going down the trail look like 1970 happened in vain. We are the children of the revolution. We are the children of the 70s. We are the children of the revolution. We are the fighters, if you please. It's we who fought for your salvation, so you don't have to fight. We are the children of the revolution who fought to make things right. You make me feel we fought a losing battle when I look at you today. Oh God, we are the children of the revolution. We are the children of the revolution. We are the children of the revolution who fought so that you won't be this way. Old dagger is grey and aging now, weak from time but still stands for right. Rafik Shah, your contribution is not forgotten. Nunez haven't given up the fight. Beverly Jones, God rest her soul. Guy Haywood and Brian Jeffers too. These are just some of the people who fought and died. Yes, they give their lives for you. Many more have died, too much to mention. Many more are still around. And then there are those of us who continue to make our contribution in song. We are the children of the revolution. We are the children of the 70s. We are the children of the revolution. We are the fighters, if you please.
Governance on Cue, Monday nights from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Let's get to the point. Too many reports, proposals, policy recommendations, and implementation strategies for achieving social and economic growth gathering dust on shelves. Institutions eroded, compromised, and broken. Recommendations being ignored while poverty persists among the people. Governance on Cue. Break through the barriers of uncertainty and despair and get back to the basics of good governance with bold new ideas for initiatives and growth for all of the people. Rebuild our institutions and get them back on track. Governance on Cue. Discuss and understand the urgency to get real growth and empower the people to convert sound policies into tangible action, to fully engage local expertise and entrepreneurs at home and abroad, to let all ideas and voices contend, to stop putting square pegs in round holes and recycling unfulfilled government utterances. Let's see the big picture for all sectors in one integrated economy and speak to growth from the bottom up. Governance on Cue, promoting good governance for growth. Fresh ideas and new mindsets for tangible results-oriented progress and growth for all. Governance on Cue. Everyone welcome to join the conversation. Call us at 767-449-3095, 96 or 97, or 767-616-4257. From overseas, call 305-432-9624. Governance on Q, Monday nights, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Only on the big station. Only on Q95.
Very good afternoon to our listeners to Q95 FM. It is just about 6 past the hour of 6 o'clock, and I want to welcome all of you to this special edition of Governance on Q. My name is Thompson Fontaine, and I'm sitting in, at least for the time being, for Afi Mate, who will be joining us sometime during the course of the program. But we have a very interesting program lined up for you. And we will certainly be taking your phone calls much later on in the program. But we have a very special guest in studio at this time with us. He's no stranger to Dominica, no stranger to the microphones of Q95 FM radio station. He's joining us from New York. This is a former ambassador, Dominica's ambassador to the UN, that is, Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, who in his very little introduction, of course, hails from the village of Grande, and for more than 10 years served as Dominica's ambassador. He was appointed in 2002 on until 2010, so 8 years there in the position at the United Nations, has had a front seat to a lot of developments. And one of the major accomplishments of Ambassador Gregoire was the setting up of a memorial in honor of slavery that he worked very hard to achieve. It came to fruition after he left the UN, but nonetheless it happened, and certainly something that we in Dominica are very proud of. Of course, Ambassador Gregoire spent those 8 years agitating for small island states, and was very instrumental, was a big voice, certainly a big voice there in the UN. And so we are very thankful for him tonight as we talk about the issues of governance. And we want to look at governance within the context of a lot of what has been happening of late concerning the United Nations. Certainly, we have been hearing a lot about what's going on in the UN, and the big news last week that the former president of the United Nations, John Ashe from Antigua, who held that position in 2014 and who was arrested by the US authorities, along with Ng Lapseng, a Dominican who holds a Dominican diplomatic passport issued in 2004 by the Security Administration, who was arrested along with Lorenzo, there from the Dominican Republic, Ambassador Lorenzo from the Dominican Republic, and several other aides of Ng Lapseng. We learned of the untimely passing, termed an accident by the forensics people there in upstate New York. Unfortunately for Mr. Ashe, whilst exercising, we are told that he was killed by a barbell, one of those weights falling on his neck, and leading to his untimely death. But there are a lot of issues around this that we want to discuss with Mr. Gregoire this evening. Certainly the issues of governance within the US, the issue of bribery that has really tainted the United Nations, because you would recall that one of the things that came out of this whole episode was that John Ashe was given several gifts, several hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was given an entire basketball court with $30,000 built in his backyard, Rolex watches and different gifts that he was given, trips, first class hotels, and all the rest of it that he was given, and in exchange for giving support to the idea of a center that would be set up in Macau by Ng Lapseng. And the UN certainly under a lot of criticism, and that's why we want Mr. Gregoire to kind of join in the conversation. And as we start off tonight, certainly Crispin, you've been following, I know you've been out of the UN for a little bit, but you've been following what has been going on with regards to Ng Lapseng, with regards to Arthur Ashe and Lorenzo, and the whole scandal. How has this affected the United Nations?
Well, first of all, Thompson, let me say good evening to your listeners, and I'm honored to be here and to speak on a topic that's dear to me, which is governance, but also governance at the international level. Governance of the United Nations is one of the institutions. As you know, all of the international institutions, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, are facing governance challenges. And I believe over the course of the next few years, these institutions will have to address seriously their governance challenges. Well, on the question of what is termed in the public domain as the UN bribery scheme, and in the media, I have to say that it has profoundly affected the image of the UN. I was, if you will, lucky or fortunate to be part of John Ash's cabinet. I worked with John Ash. I knew John Ash very well. He was, when I came to the UN in 2002, he was the Deputy Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda. And then he, in 2000, I believe it was in 2004, when the government changed from the Labour Party to the party of Baldwin Spencer, he became the ambassador to the UN. And let me say, you know, John Ash, in my view, was probably one of the most influential diplomats at the UN, not just from the Caribbean. Because in addition, and it's not when people find themselves in difficulty, you have to look at the bad side of their lives. But I would say, given that he has passed, I would be one of the first to say that I had tremendous respect for John Ash. He had tremendous intellect. He was affable. He was a consummate diplomat. He rose to the leadership of many initiatives in the UN. If there was a person to be called the father of sustainable development in the UN, it would be John Ash. He played a major role in the World Conference on Sustainable Development, which was held in Johannesburg in 2002. I think he's one of the chairs of that. He played a major role in the Rio +20 conference in Brazil in 2012. Before that, he had served as the chairman of the budget committee of the UN, what we call the fifth committee, the entire budget committee. He served on the executive boards of UNICEF, of UNDP. So he was a major figure. And when John Ash spoke, people listened. John Ash's presidency was an important milestone for the Caribbean, because this was the third time, I believe, that a Caribbean country would be the president of the General Assembly. And I think he laid the framework. That presidency was geared to laying the framework for the Sustainable Development Goals, which replaced the Millennium Development Goals. So you can fully understand by what I'm saying that the guy had a broad reach internationally. And one more thing I should say about him. He also, in the climate change negotiations, which he was very, very involved at the highest level, he was the chairman of the Kyoto Protocol negotiation stream in the climate change negotiations. So that gives you the full thing. And furthermore, professionally, he was, and academically, he was a PhD in bioengineering. So he was really a brilliant chap.
Yes.
How he ended up in the clutches of the NG Lab saying, that baffled me.
Well, he was introduced by our Prime Minister, so who knows?
Well, I don't know who introduced whom. I'm still I don't know who introduced whom. I just know that all of these people were friends. Who introduced whom is but in the course of this development, we learned a lot of things we didn't know. We learned from the Wall Street Journal that NG Lap Seng was the go-between the change of relations between Dominica and People's Republic of China. We didn't know that before.
Yes.
We also learned from the court hearing on the, actually, I can be upfront and say I was actually in the court the day that all of the defendants were arraigned. right? They were brought into court and read the charges read to them. And after that ended, the bail hearing for NG Lapsang went on. And I would say in the first 15 minutes, what was most striking to me, Dominica was mentioned in the first 15 minutes of the bail hearing, because it was mentioned that because he had a Dominica passport, diplomatic passport that is, and in the court they actually call it an honorary passport, he was a flight risk. And that was, the prosecution was arguing very strong that he should not get bail. And eventually at the end of the bail hearing, I couldn't stay to the end because it went much longer than I had planned. But at the end, the compromise was that he would be given bail for $50 million. He would have a bracelet on his leg. He would be confined under house arrest to an apartment that he had purchased in Manhattan just weeks before he was arrested. But he actually bought his prison in New York.
Incredible.
And and the case is still ongoing.
But Crispin, let's step back a little bit and go back to about 2-3 weeks before the arrest of NG Lapsang. This iconic photograph of Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit in Macau with NG Lapsang, with Lorenzo, with John Ash. There's a very famous picture that has been splashed across the globe, basically, where Roosevelt Skerrit is in the middle of those four of this three other gentlemen. And we know that at that conference that two things happened. That there was an undertaking for the conference center, for the UN conference center to be built in Macau, but there was also an additional undertaking that was made between Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit and NG Lapsang to build this technology center here in Dominica, this center of excellence. Take us a little bit, inform the people of Dominica a little bit more about what happened during that conference with regards to those two major things that NG Lapsang was looking to spearhead.
Yes. Well, as you know, and unfortunately, we have never heard from the head of government that he was in Macau on the pivotal date of Erica. And what was happening in Macau on that date was a UN meeting on South-South cooperation. And there were a number of mostly ambassadors. Strange enough, I think he was the only head of government at that meeting. It was actually they had the conference, and at the end of the conference, certain agreements were signed. I should say that the conference was organized by the UN South-South office, which comes under UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and the host of the conference in Macau was NG Lapsang's foundation. It's called the Sun Kian IP Group Foundation. And after the conference, a number of agreements were signed. There was an agreement with the Samoa Chamber of Commerce to do a technology center technology transfer center in Samoa, and then that would be for the Pacific. And then an agreement between the Sun Kian Group Foundation, this UN Office on South Cooperation, and the government of Dominica was signed. I have not seen in the press releases of the Dominica government any kind of reference to that being signed. But interestingly, that agreement has surfaced. I've actually seen it on the internet.
Okay.
And when I saw it on the internet, I began to ask questions in the UNDP and find out, is this authentic? And the sense I'm getting, it is authentic. So the signature of the Prime Minister is on it. He has a very unique signature, quite unique, and it's on there. So I don't think it would be. And so the people who signed that agreement was NG Lapsang, Theresa Liu representing the UN Office on South-South Cooperation and the Prime Minister.
Theresa Liu was also arrested, right? She was one of those.
No, Theresa
she's
Liu
not. Okay,
works for the UN.
She's right. That's the UN. That's the UN person.
Yeah.
So, what can you tell us? What more can you tell us about some of the details of this? What was that supposed to be?
Well, what baffles me is that the agreement. I don't see anything strange in the agreement that makes Dominica look shady. The UN, I worked for UNDP, and at the time when I worked for UNDP, I was for Latin America and the Caribbean. I was the point person for South-South cooperation. That's a new emerging area of development now, that countries that have made progress in the developing world, countries like, for example, Brazil, like Chile, Argentina, in our region, Mexico, they are now they're making a concerted effort to help the poorer countries like us, right? So that's South-South cooperation, okay? So there's nothing sinister about South-South cooperation. The thing is that it was an attempt to set up the Center for the Latin America and the Caribbean here. I thought that was a good thing. What I don't understand is why the secrecy about it and why no mention has ever been made. So when after Erica happened and the Prime Minister got back home, he never said he was in Macau for the first thing, and he never said he signed any agreement to set up anything. It's just like been swept under the carpet. So when I read the agreement, it basically was saying that the Sun Kian Group, NG Lapsing's foundation, would fund the center. And the money would have been probably channeled through the UN Office on South-South Cooperation, and they would provide the technical expertise to set it up and whatever.
Okay, very, very interesting indeed. No, but one of the things that also emerged, Crispin, at this conference in Macau, and just for our listeners, if you're just joining us, it is 22 past of 6 o'clock. This is Governance of Q, and I'm sitting in for Afimate. I'm Thompson Fontaine. Afimate should be joining us any minute now, but we are talking to former ambassador to the United Nations from Dominica, Mr. Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, who, once he left the ambassadorship there at the UN, also worked for a couple of years at the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, in New York. And we are discussing the issues of governance surrounding the NG Lapsang John Ash affair with the UN, and we are discussing specifically at this point this conference in Macau that incidentally took place on the same day that Erica struck Dominica. Dominica's Prime Minister Ruth Lescavit was in Macau with NG Lapsang and Ambassador John Ash, along with John Lorenzo, or the ambassador, the Dominican ambassador to the UN, and a few weeks later the three gentlemen were arrested by UK authorities. We've since learned of the death of John Ash, ruled an accident for now, but investigations are continuing on this. But Crispin, I wanted to talk about something that happened there, and I've seen some of the references made in the press. One of the reasons why the UN came under scrutiny, because there was some I think not speculation, but there was some concern that a lot of the airfares and the hotel rooms and so on for the UN diplomats, including our Dominica's ambassador Vince Henderson, was in fact paid for by NG Lapsang.
Yes, that is correct. It's not unusual that a host would pay for airfare and hotel accommodation. That's not a host. The problem was that there was a larger problem. NG Lapsang, to be very blunt, infiltrated the UN as far back as 2006. Okay? He had a network of NGOs that he organized to infiltrate the UN. Like, I can give you about 4 or 5 names.
Wow.
The World Harmony Foundation was NG Lapsang's, and I met them at the UN. I had no idea who they were, but that was one. You have another outfit called the Friends of the UN. You have the Global Sustainability Foundation. He had a TV network called South News, and there were at least 2 others that I can't keep track of all the names. But what I do know, there was a pattern, a deliberate pattern by Lapsang to have influence in the UN, and the way he did it was infiltrate through NGOs, and they organize activities, they sponsor concerts. I'll give you an example. I was, Angelo Allen has been raising over the last few years this name, Mr. Wu, right? And, you know, I came face to face with a Mr. Wu. I didn't know who that Mr. Wu was. And here it is. You mentioned at the beginning of the show that I was involved in the slave trade memorial that was established at the UN. And we, in tandem with that, we have the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery on the 25th of March every year. And there's a whole week of activities that go with it. Well, in the early years we had concerts. And that particular year we had a big concert, the biggest concert ever at the UN. Maybe like 3,000 people attended. And we had big artists like Akon and Peter Buffett and people like Felicia Rashad from, you know, who was on the Cosby Show,
right.
You know. So just a huge group of artists were present. And I was the chairman of the committee, and the UN, the Department of Public Information, which is the UN body that would organize this, they said that they had gotten some funding from a Mr. Wu. So I said, well, who's Mr. Wu? They said, well, he's this Chinese guy who gives to the UN. So I wanted more information, but the UN, what I did when that happened, I said to the UN, well, since I don't know who Mr. Wu is, I would like the legal office of the UN to give us a legal advice whether we should accept that money. And the legal office said, no, we shouldn't accept that money. But Mr. Wu found another way of what he did, because his money was going to pay for the logistical costs of artists attending, whether it's airfares, whatever. This, you know, to do a concert at the UN costs you about $100,000 just to do the stage, because, you know, the UN General Assembly Hall is not a concert hall, so you have to
convert the whole thing.
And then you bring in the sound and the lighting. By the time you add up and plus the security of the UN, they charge you for being there for the concert. By the time you add the bottom line, it's $100,000, right? So what Lapsing and them did, they got an NGO from outside called the Culture Project. They contracted them to provide those services to the UN, and the UN accepted it that way. So, but Lapsang still paid for the expenses.
Okay.
So, you know, so he did there, and then Thompson. I keep, you know, I'm one of those guys who keeps a lot of documents. So I kept the program of that thing. And when this thing happened in Macau, all that thing, and then his arrest, I went back and I'm now saying, wow, this is
Mr. Wu is Angel Lapsang.
And not only is he Mr. Wu and Angela, he has another name, David Nig.
David NG.
Yeah, David NG, right.
Yeah,
NG is pronounced in Chinese Ing, right. So David Ing. And it's just like I think I called you one day and I said I figured out something, that in that whole time that Angie Lapsing is also David Nig and he's also Mr. Wu.
Yes.
So he had three names.
He had three names. And it was one and the same person.
Same person.
And we now know that Mr. Wu, David Nig, Angie Lapsang was in fact responsible, or so he claims. In fact, that came out in court. It was quoted in the not the Washington Post, but the Wall Street Journal, that he was the one who was the go-between Dominica. In fact, he introduced Roosevelt Skerritt to the Chinese in Barbados, and was the one behind the transition. And we later found out through a question that was asked in Parliament that in 2004, that was the first time he received, actually 2003, when he received the first diplomatic passport from the government of Dominica. And we also know later on when there was the trial, when Dominica was taken to court in the BVI over the Lai River Hotel saga, we also know that at that point, one of the things that came out in court was Mr. Skerritt was indicating that he would approach Mr. Wu for the $20 million to take care of the 20 million of Felix Sheng that was in question. Yeah. So we see, you know, that for since in fact 2002, Angel Lapsang has been tied up or tied in a lot with Dominica and with Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt, and Dominicans knew very little of that relationship, and it's very interesting as only now we're finding out some of those behind the scene dealings.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting to me is that in the court, when the prosecution raised that he had a Dominica diplomatic passport and that he was a flight risk, Lapsing's lawyer stood up and said that was an honorary passport given to him because he was investing 20 million in a hotel in Dominica. So all of this is sort of
so together. So that was the same 20 million. But so the question then becomes, Crispin, did he invest? Did he consider that he invested this 20 million, or on the promise of investing this 20 million? On the promise of investing this 20 million, because that's the same 20 million.
Yeah.
Of course, that was supposed to have gone to Felix Cheng to take care of his investment. So it's very interesting how the Dominican public are kept in the dark, and we only find out things after. And that's why we're here tonight talking about governance and the need to be transparent, because ultimately those things come out.
I will want to address that whole question of foreigners who represent our country, who are given diplomatic appointments. I think that's a question we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
But I want to go back, Thompson, to focus a bit on the UN and what this whole infiltration of the UN did, and specifically, you know, how did this thing with John Ash being arrested as the former president of the General Assembly, what led to that? Well, what led to that was NG Lapsing was interested in doing a conference center in Macau with the UN brand on it. Yeah, and that's significant because, you know, the UN is very careful about companies and corporations using their brand. They don't want companies. This is the brand of the 194 member states. That's the governments of the world. They don't want companies to have access to their brand. And this was a deliberate attempt to infiltrate the UN, to hijack the brand. That is what it was all about. And what happened, right, there was a particular letter that the late John Ash had written to the Secretary General. And in the letter, he had suggested that this conference center was a good proposal, or proposing this idea. But in that original letter, there was no mention of the Sun Kian group. Strange enough, an amendment surfaced and got a UN number, right? And it mentioned the Sun Kian group. And that's what the Americans begin to focus on. Once they saw that, they picked. I'm sure 2 people at the UN lost their jobs for that, because the Secretary General had no knowledge of that amended letter.
So basically, it went to the UN, to the general, to Ban Ki-moon.
Yes.
Without him knowing that NG Lapsing was behind this.
The first letter never mentioned the Sun Kian group, and that letter Ban Ki-moon saw it. The second letter, which the same letter had an amendment in one paragraph that inserted the words that the Sun Kian group would build it.
That they would build it, right.
And then it didn't go through the legitimate channels of approvals, because it should have gone to the Secretary General's office, and the Chief of Staff of the Secretary General would have seen that, and then they would have reviewed why was that amendment coming, and if they would have picked it up then, if it had really come through the right channels. They kept it at the lowest level, right, of just the print shop, if you will, the people who are dealing with making the amendments. But this is a significant amendment. If you make that amendment, it really should go to the office of the Secretary General, right? And so that was one thing.
So the U.S. authorities then see that, and suddenly that sends up a red flag, and they begin to investigate.
Right. If you read the complaint, which is the indictment of John Ash, and you read the entire document, you will get the details of that. The U.S. really focused on that. So that is the first thing. The second thing has to do with the bribes that were received to do that. That whole changing that letter the net result was payments were made in return for that, because now Lapsing has a letter that he can wave now and say, the UN is behind me, and I have the UN, and now I'm going to build this thing, and so that was a boon. That was a leap, a quantum leap for him.
Yes,
right?
yes. But in a roundabout way, it led to some extent to his downfall. At least tying him in with John Ash, because we know the U.S. authorities were investigating him separately. He has been investigated separately.
Let me say a few things about NG Lapsing. He was not new to U.S. authorities. During the Clinton, when Bill Clinton was running for office, Lapsing tried to give $7 million to the Clinton campaign. And it was actually returned by the Democratic Party. And the guy who was the go-between, he's Lapsang's man in Arkansas. He was running, his name was Charlie Tree, who was running a restaurant. He was the go-between, and he went to jail, right? In addition, there's Lapsang has other cases dealing with casinos in state of Las Vegas, and there's he was actually subpoenaed for this Las Vegas case having to do with some casinos, and he didn't appear. He's linked to a billionaire guy called Samuel Adelson, who gives a lot of money to the Republican Party. And Lapsang didn't appear, and they have that. The feds have that against him, right? He was supposed to appear in court. But coming back to the UN, what happened, right? The reason the feds arrested him was not because of the UN issue yet. That came later. He, over a period of time, over the last 2 to 3 years, he brought $4.5 million in cash into the U.S. on private jets. So he'd come into the U.S. and in one case he brought 900,000 cash dollars, right? And each time he would tell U.S. Customs, this for me to buy antiques.
Or to gamble.
I have to gamble, do whatever. But the mistake he was making is that when he's leaving, he's not informing U.S. Customs how much he's spent in the U.S. and how much he's leaving with. So all they know is that he brought 4.5 million, and because he didn't declare how much he's bringing back, they believe that he was paying people money in the U.S.
right
over that time. He may have gambled some of it too.
Yes, and I think that's where they really went after him, because in a way he was kind of breaking the US rules in that sense, and now then they were able to subsequently trace that some of these monies were in fact paid to John Ash,
right,
and to other diplomats in the UN,
right, especially Lorenzo. Now he as I said, he owned the TV network called South News, which is actually located on like 48th Street, corner of 48th Street and 2nd Avenue, on the same building with the Canadian Mission. And South News covers all the developing countries' issues on development, that kind of thing. Now, Thompson, as we talk on the situation of the UN, I think especially with John Ash, I think there were some real gaps that was exploited. For example, when you become the president of the General Assembly, your country is required to pay the cost of hosting of the presidency.
Okay.
All right. But other countries can give support.
Okay.
And UN agencies can give support. Like in my case, for example, I work for UNDP. My director said to me, Crispin, I think you can help the presidency because they have the World Conference on Indigenous People to organize, and you have good expertise on indigenous people. I'm sending you to work with John Ash.
Okay.
And I went to meet John Ash, told him, he said, sure, I really need you, Crispin, and I came on board. So that was UNDP making me available. In the same vein, I know that UNFPA, United Nations Family Planning Agency, gave staff. Then some countries gave staff. I know the government of Turkey gave staff. The government of South Africa gave staff. There were a couple of Eastern European diplomats who worked in that presidency. But countries gave money as well. I know that a number of countries gave money, and then private sources gave money, including NG Lapsang. There was nothing wrong with him giving money, but the UN has now tightened the rules. What happened, right, is on the 23rd of October 2015, Ban Ki-moon announced a decision to convene a task force to review the whole operations of the Office of the President, right? And that task force put out a report, I believe it was in March or April this year, and it made a number of recommendations, and we will get into the recommendations. They're moving to really tighten how the office of the President of the General Assembly is run, and to make it fairly accountable to the member states and to the public.
Very interesting. Crispin, I want to bring all of this kind of closer to home, because there might be a number of Dominicans listening and they say, well, this is all very interesting stuff, and here it is, Dominica is a member of the United Nations, we pay an ambassador good bit of money to be in New York. Our ambassador, current ambassador Vince Henderson, even was able to avail himself of an advanced degree whilst there. And I guess the question that the Dominican public must be asking is what really are the benefits to Dominica of having a UN ambassador? And as an ambassador yourself, can you speak to that issue?
Yes.
In a way that the Dominican public can appreciate and understand why it is important for us to spend that kind of money that could probably be going to other areas in Dominica to sustain an ambassador there in New York.
Okay. Well, you know, when you are a member of you have accepted to be a member of the UN, you have to be active in it. And I would say Thompson, if I were to, because Dominica is small and we have very small resources, if I were to pick a place for us to have an ambassador, if let us say you said to me, Crispin, if we can only have one ambassador because we don't have money, the one place I would say to have an ambassador is the UN, because all the countries of the world are represented there. You can speak to any country in the world at the UN. Even countries that are not represented in Washington, for example, are at the UN. Cuba is not, well, no, Cuba has an embassy in Washington now with the thawing of the relationship. But let's say like North Korea, for example, doesn't have representation in Washington. There might be one or two other countries that don't have embassies there. So, but at the UN, you can speak to all the countries. And if your head of state wants to go to visit any one of the countries, you can organize that for them through New York, all right? Okay. Now, is there value for it? I would say yes. First of all, the UN itself is a large family of, the UN is not just Ban Ki-moon and the Secretariat. That is the core of it. But you have what's called the funds and programs, the UNICEF, the UNDP, UNFPA, UN Office on Drugs and Crime. You have the entire set of agencies, of international organizations that you're part of. And so being involved in the UN is important. Now, here's the thing. When you choose to be an ambassador at the UN, it's a full-time job. It's not a job for going to school. You know, I don't see how you can go to school and do the people's work. You're doing the Dominican people's work. You are dealing with all the countries, and you know, you obviously cannot do everything in all the countries, but there are set of, for example, the EU. If you want to speak to the EU, the group of EU countries is at the UN, right? You want to speak to the US is at the UN. And you can also go to Washington as well, right? You want to speak to the South American countries, or the group of Latin American and countries includes Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. They are at the UN. You want to speak now increasingly in the global governance of international organization, of which the UN is the leading one. You have the emergence of the civil society organization, the NGOs, and they can be very influential. Some of these NGOs are more powerful than the Dominica. I mean, I worked for the Ford Foundation in Africa. The Ford Foundation gives away $500 million in grants a year, right? Can Dominica give that kind of money out?
Right, but also you would think as well that you would hope that the ambassador would be in a position to at least make try to get some of those funds to a country like Dominica, right?
Well, here's how I think about how you deal with the world. You deal with the world in three realms. One is government to government, two, corporations, and three, non-governmental organizations. That is how, if you're gonna have a posture to the world, that's how you do it, all right? And if you're going to engage in these three realms, then you need a full-time person who can deal with that. Now, here's Dominica's problem at the UN, and that's why I wouldn't do that job again, because it's not an easy job. Dominica is the only country in CARICOM that has only one diplomat at the UN, and that's the ambassador.
But we have two. We have the ambassador to Ocean and Seas, the Zampoli, Paoli Zampoli.
But that guy is just
He's not really he's not really there. He has the title.
Well,
and
I don't know who appointed him, but the point is that I don't think he takes a salary.
Okay.
Yeah. That guy is more interested in being inside the UN for his own business interests. He's a businessman.
He's a businessman,
right? And I think that I have real difficulty with businessmen being diplomats. If you're going to be a diplomat, it's not that a businessman can't be a diplomat, But when you choose to be a diplomat, you have to put the business away for the time you're going to be a diplomat. And that guy is basically feathering his nest. That's how I can say it, right?
Okay. So, for all intents and purposes, there is only one person.
There's one person.
Ambassador Henderson. That is.
Yeah. When I was there, that was the case. I didn't even have a driver. It was so shameful in a way that every other CARICOM country has a driver. I have to bum a ride with the other ambassadors, and at times I was so embarrassed that I take the subway because I can't be always asking for a ride. Where's my we have a vehicle, but we don't have a driver. The thing is that it's too much for one person to do. The meetings at the UN is a lot of meetings. And then if you try to do with corporations, which is on the investment side, and if you try to do with NGOs, that's another thing. So it takes a lot. And what was interesting to me, I was reading was looking at the voting record of that ambassador Henderson in the first year. He was totally absent at the UN. I think it's when Lennox Linton really rapped on him, then he realized, people are looking at my voting record. You cannot be absent.
Yeah.
And if you're going to school full time, there's no way you will not.
Yeah, I thought Ambassador Henderson did a very great disservice to the profession and also to Dominica. I mean, really, I thought it was in poor taste that you would spend that amount of time going to school when, in fact, there's work, as I said, there's a lot of work to be done. And Crispin, I know from your standpoint, you got involved. I mean, you were involved in the SIDS, this Small Sustainable Development Initiative. You were involved in this memorial for slavery and so on.
To be fair to Henderson, he is involved actively in the small island states. That's really what he has focused on, and specifically on the energy side. But for me, the agenda of the UN is so much broader. We have the human rights area, we have the issue of women, we have the issue of indigenous peoples, we have the issue of disabled peoples, we have the issue of things like tax issues, international taxation. We have the question of peacekeeping. We have the question of staffing the UN and making sure that your nationals are in the quota.
Right.
We have a small quota though. It's only like 5 Dominicans in the quota for the UN staffing. So we have to make sure that when these people rotate, that we keep the quota filled.
Right.
And so it's really a tremendous role. It's too much for one person. I really think that we have to fill. But here's what I would like to see futuristically as far as our representation. I really think that Dominica has come of age. We are almost 40 years an independent country. It is time for us to have legislation that governs our foreign relations, and it must be tabled in Parliament. All of these people who are just being appointed as ambassadors, which we know nothing about.
Yes.
I came up with a list, Thompson, recently of 24 individuals.
Wow, Crispin, just before you take that, this is a very good discussion that I want us to have.
Let us have it later in the program. Let us go back to the UN and the bribery thing, because we want to keep it on the governance.
Yes. So, but that is, we are not going to miss out on this one, certainly. But what I wanted to do as well is to, for the next few minutes, open up for our listeners who wants to call in and kind of ask any questions with regards to what we've been talking about. I'm discussing here with former ambassador to the UN, Crispin Gregoire, who we are talking about the whole governance issues surrounding the UN, Dominica's role within the organization, whether or not it is beneficial to Dominica. If you'd like to weigh in on the conversation, you can call us here. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. And if you call on the overseas line, you can reach us at 305-432-9624. So we certainly like to hear from you if you have any questions on this very critical topic of discussion, of course. And as we know, Angel Lapseng is facing this bribery trial, if you like, in New York. And what is the latest there, Crispin, on this particular trial? What's going on there?
Well, with the death of Ambassador Ash, the next person to be tried will be Jeff Yin, who is Lapsing's
like assistant.
He's assistant. And then I think the feds will leave Lapsing for last because they have a lot to talk to him in the courts.
In the courts, yes. And do you think that this is the end in terms of what you've been hearing or seeing, that this is the end in terms of the arrest, or the U.S. authorities talking about further arrests, or is that...
Okay, let me address that. The first thing I should say about the other thing I should say about Lapsing is that his lawyer pulled out. His main lawyer, Mr. Braffman, pulled out, and his current lawyer is a Chinese-American lawyer. What they did do additional arrests, and I expect there may be more arrests. There's the case of a lady called Vivian Wang, who worked for Lapsang, but it's a separate part of the bribery. The bribery scandal has several pieces to it. Vivian Wang was the vice president of South News with Lorenzo.
Okay.
But her case has to do with, she negotiated 2 diplomatic passports with John Ash for her husband and another businessman, and they paid $500,000 and
but that was paid to Antigua or Dominica?
No, to Antigua.
To Antigua.
Yeah. Okay. What they did was they paid it to an account in Trinidad, and then they from there they paid people in Antigua.
Okay.
Yeah. So that case, Vivian Wang is on bail, and I don't know how that case is going to play out now that Ash is deceased. So, but sometimes that doesn't matter because the feds have all the evidence, they have all the documentation, right? So that's one case. Now, there is, I suspect that there are 2 UN staff who were involved in amending that letter I mentioned, who are probably likely to be indicted.
Okay.
All right, and I don't know whoever else. I've been following this fairly closely and looking at what the court is saying from time to time. But the prosecutor, Mr. Prit Barara, everybody is scared of him. He has brought down 3 big names. He's brought down the Speaker of the New York Assembly and another politician in New York State, and then John Ash and Lapsang. So, when Barara speaks, everybody gets scared.
Yes.
Now, as far as what the UN, there's one thing that's still to come out. The report of the task force that Ban Ki-moon set up to look at why this happened under their noses and what to do to stop it and make sure, put in some accountability and some controls. So the report came out, and there's a set of recommendations which we can get into later. I have it here. I can, highlight some of them. Like for example, one of the things that happened under John Ash presidency, he had set up 2 accounts to receive money from donors for the presidency, because Antigua, while they have the presidency, they didn't have money to meet the cost.
Right.
As I said before, people contributed, staff and that kind of thing, but the total cost of it can run into maybe millions, right? Yeah. Because they travel, some staff full-time staff have to be paid, like the chief of the cabinet, the deputy chief of the cabinet. Right. Their salary is coming from that, because the UN doesn't give the office of the president much money. They give some more administrative costs, like secretaries, communication costs, operating costs, but as far as the going to big conferences and flying here on business class and that kind of thing, other people are covering this cost.
Okay.
So the Ash now, he was the only signatory on these 2 accounts, and the UN is saying that is a no-no. There must be, whoever is in the presidency, you must first report to the General Assembly how much money they got, who they got it from, and it must also, when it comes down to individuals who are not which are not member states, it has to be vetted through the Office of Legal Counsel, through the budget of. They're putting in some new controls.
New controls, yes.
The other thing that they want to do is to, first you have to give interim reports. So maybe at 6 months' time, you have to give the General Assembly, the member states, a report on what you're doing. And when you leave, at the end of your presidency, you have to give them a report publicly, you know, and not just to give them a written report, but to come before the Assembly and give a speech, like how, you know, the U.S. president gives the State of the Union.
Right.
You have to do that now.
Yes,
So
okay. Wow. So Crispin, in your view, has this scandal tainted the UN?
Yes, the scandal has tainted the UN because the media has done a big job on the UN. You see, there was always, you know, diplomats live fairly elaborate, flamboyant lives, some of them. And there are a lot of people in the American media who don't like diplomats. But, you know, at the UN, you have rich diplomats. I mean, if you look at the guys who come from the Gulf states, the Arab states, they have a lot of money. They're in beautiful suits. They have expensive cars. They have drivers.
They live in uptown Manhattan.
And you go to their homes.
Yes.
You go to their home. I could
The
never.
penthouses
I can't entertain. I mean, you go to a ambassador of, let's say, like Kuwait. He has a whole floor of one of these high-rise buildings. He has maids. He has, you know, the dinner is, you can have dinner for 20, 30 people at the same time. You know, that is the kind of thing, right? So diplomats live a privileged life. And more than that, they don't pay taxes. You know, unless you're like me, that's a U.S. citizen, then I have to pay.
Right.
I don't have I don't have tax exemption. You know, but
and in fact that's what they held John Ashon, right? The tragic ending was that he did not pay his taxes on the monies that he received
precisely
from lapsing.
Right. And it's because not only he was a permanent resident of the U.S. So what happened when he became a permanent resident? He waived his immunity. You see, if he was not a permanent resident of the U.S., he would not have had those problems because he could have received those bribes if he did receive them, right? And it wouldn't be an issue for the U.S. because he's not a U.S. resident. He's not a U.S. resident. But the fact that he's a U.S. resident, he's liable to pay taxes, and he didn't declare that. So that money came into his account. The U.S. knows every time a dollar comes into your account, you know? So if you got $1 million, you can be sure they know you haven't paid. They're calculating how much of that is there.
Yes, right. Yes. Wow, you know, it's really fascinating, Crispin, just in terms of all what that has happened and the speed at which all of that has happened. We're still trying to digest all of it here in Dominica. What we'll do, it's 2 before the hour of 7 o'clock. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussions there with Crispin Gregoire, former ambassador to the United Nations, on the state of governance within the UN and its impact and implications for Dominica. We'll also be looking at Dominica's appointing of ambassadors and this particular foreign policy agenda of the Roosevelt Skerrit administration. Stay tuned.
And you're off there?
That a history never learned is a history doomed to be repeated. That man's heart would be hardened if none to himself, and the cycle of destruction would be completed. And the cities and towns would be filled with corruption. Leaders would rule by hate and division. And when religion walks hand
obedience. And just like Babylon back then, seems an unseen force wields the system on a destructive course that no one dares to stop. These are the days of numbers, great signs and wonders. Seems we are back in the biblical days. Whoa, whoa. These are the days of Babylon. These are the days of false religion. These are the days of revelation. Whoa, whoa. These are the days when men has lost his way. These are the days when evil seems to pay. Everything says these are the days. And these are the days. Whoa, whoa, these are the days. Ooh, boy, na 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 na. The earth is changing, it's telling everywhere. There's even less oxygen in the air. The forces of nature, like never before, showing death and destruction everywhere. And we never stop long enough to consider, are we in sync with creation or creator? But it's all been said before, it's all been done before. We're no wiser than before, and it's also clear. Nobody really cares.
Okay, welcome back to our discussion on governance in Q. It is free past the hour of 7 o'clock, and we go straight to the telephone call. Good evening, caller.
Yes, Mr. International Secretary, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you doing?
How is Mr. Crispin Gregoire sitting with you right there?
Crispin?
Yes, yes. Good evening, caller.
Yeah, man, I'm just touching base. Now, Mr. Gregoire, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
With the passing of Mr. John Ash, what implication or what is the ramification of that to that case, that corruption case that is going on? And then second, while you were ambassador, Mr. Gregoire, did you or your government meet with the Dominicans in the diaspora?
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you, caller.
Thank you very much.
Let me start with the second question first. Yes, we did meet with the Dominican diaspora a few times. I remember a meeting at which Prime Minister Skerritt attended in Brooklyn at Medgar Evers College. That was before 2010. So I left in 2010. I know we had that meeting. There were other times that there were forums. Yeah, there were times. Sometimes it was ministers who met the Dominican diaspora, or aspects of the Dominican diaspora. But I do remember clearly this meeting at Medgar Evers, which is part of the City University of New York in Brooklyn. The Prime Minister did speak at that. It was a meeting with Dominican nationals. However, I must say that as much as a lot of talk is done about the diaspora, we don't see the Dominican minister responsible for diaspora affairs coming to the U.S. to meet and have forums with the Dominican nationals. In fact, the only time that they have these meetings is when these nationals come here for Independence Day, and I know there's the meeting of the diaspora, but the other side of it, what I'd like to see is for them to come to New York and come to other cities in the U.S. to meet the Dominican diaspora. As regards the first question, I'm not an attorney and I don't know the court process. The case of John Ash, because of his demise, is over.
Yes.
But the federal government still has other cases that they will prosecute. You have Jeff Yin and you have Angie Lapsing, you have Vivian Yang. what is important to note is that 3 people have already pleaded guilty to these charges. One lady, Miss Heidi Park, who was the financial manager of the Global Sustainability Foundation, one of the organizations that was doling out the bribes. You have also the Miss Vivian, Miss Sherry Yan, who is one of she was the executive director of the organization that was doling out the bribes. And then you have Francisco Lorenzo, who it was the main man of NG lapsing at the UN. He pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy. He pleaded guilty to bribery. He pleaded guilty to money laundering. And he pleaded guilty to tax evasion. He's actually facing a maximum of 63 years in jail. However, because he made a plea deal, I expect the feds to be gracious and give him a shorter sentence. So as far as Miss Yan and Heidi Park, they will be sentenced sometime. I think one of them will be in August and the other one in October. And Lorenzo, I don't know what date, but sometime between now and October, he's likely to be sentenced.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Gregoire. We are joined Afi. Just a few minutes. Afi is gracious of his presence. He's certainly made an effort to be here for a few minutes. Afi, I'm not sure if you were able to listen earlier to the discussions that we've been having, but we have been talking about, the whole scandal surrounding the United Nations and the role that John Ash played, and the impact of this. We talked about the relevance of the UN even for Dominica and the kind of resources that has been spent on it. We discussed the role of our current ambassador, and while we'll be talking about the diplomatic appointments that have been made by the Skerrit regime, but I just wanted your views, Afi, rather briefly. I know, but since you are there.
It's only I've only come by actually to offer my apologies and my thanks. my apologies to Crispin, who I prevailed upon to give us his valuable time, and to you at short notice to host the program. Something has come up that required my input in terms of helping some people resolve some issues. Actually, it has to do with July 4th. It's somebody's birthday. A really, really, really good friend, and a few of us are going to do some music for her. And today's also my son's birthday, my son who lives in New York. Today's also the birthday of Freddie Nicholas, master bassist and musician, and so on. And of course, the birthday girl today is Yvonne Alexander.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Machi, we call her, teasingly. And so I just wanted to drop by to say also to the listeners to this program, who are many, that my apologies for not being here. But Thompson has done, I'm sure, a masterful job, as he always does, and I am so grateful to him for actually pinch hitting. As for the topic of the UN, I've been, Crispin, sharing with the listeners to this program some of the elements of the UN Convention on Corruption,
yes,
which actually deals with the issues that you have been talking about, and the issues of inappropriate behavior by public officials.
Yes.
It's the definition of public officials I found most fascinating, because it casts a broad net.
Yes.
Even if you are not in the paid employ of a state, but if you're carrying out functions which have impact on the public interest, you are a public official.
Right.
Yes.
Even if you're a volunteer.
Yeah.
And so it does seem to me that part of our maturing process as nations, as young nations, has to be that we are able to have intelligent and civilized discussions about these matters without allowing them to descend into the abyss of partisan politics.
Yes.
Because that is where the substance of the issues gets lost. And that is where I think, tyrants and potential tyrants have a field day.
Yes.
Because people don't understand that they do have rights, and that there are local, regional, and international safeguards against people making and abusing, if you will, their public privilege of position and authority.
Yes.
I'm one of those who believes that small countries like ours are hit harder, on a scale, in terms of the ratio of the impact of somebody stealing $1 million from the public purse here would translate into billions in a much larger economy.
Certainly.
And so it's not just about the quantum of dollars, it's about the net effect. Who loses when monies that should have gone to health or to transportation or to education goes somewhere else.
Yes.
In a small country